Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mojo Story. My name is Barkha Dutt. We continue our in-depth focus on the COVID pandemic. As many of you know, we have been in the south of India on the ground in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Now back in Delhi before we hit the reporting road again. We're fascinated to discover that the government has, in the last couple of days, actually completely altered, almost towards the end, or at least the government says it's the end of the second wave, the COVID treatment protocol. So this is really, really intriguing because even though I'm not a doctor, as somebody who was treated for COVID, as somebody who's had friends and family treated for COVID, as somebody who lost her father to COVID, I think most of us now can blindly prescribe what most Indian doctors have been prescribing at the front line. And this is what my medication looked something like this, and I bet so did yours. It started with Ivermectin. It wasn't clear what this deworming pill was being prescribed for, but we were all told to take one a day, and we were told it can't harm, so just take it. Then this was followed by Fabiflu. This, by the way, personally for me was the worst medicine. I begged my doctors to let me off it before I could complete the course. And then this was followed by Doxycycline, an antibiotic. Right? So we've got Doxy, you've got Ivermectin, and you've got Fabiflu. And this has been the set of medicines. Finally, many people, even before their oxygen levels plummeted, were being given a steroid of at least 6 milligrams dexamethasone till it actually ran short in the shops. For many families, they were sent out to purchase injections of Remdesivir, even after the WHO removed it from its approved drugs. And then many families also had to go hunting for Tociluzumab. Those injections also extraordinarily expensive. So this is what the standard COVID protocol treatment has looked like. Now guess what? All of these drugs, all of them with the exception of a crocin or a dolo for fever, and then of course the recommendation remains medically for steroids if the oxygen levels plummet, have gone away. They have vanished. As I said, towards the end of what the government is saying is the decline or the stabilization of the second wave. What does this mean for patients who had to run from pillar to post? What does it mean for those of us who had all of these drugs? What does it mean for doctors at the front line who've long been arguing that these drugs should not have been used to begin with? Will this dramatically change things on the ground? Let me introduce our panel of experts today, if we can bring them up now. We're joined by Dr. Guha. Dr. Guha is a senior physician in Bihar, which is one of the worst hit states, and health infrastructure has been much under pressure there, so it'll be interesting to get his view. Dr. Trupti Gilada is with me, and she's going to say an "I told you so" thing to me, because when I had COVID, she told me to take nothing but paracetamol, but not all the many doctors who were advising me agreed, and I went through all of those medicines that I showed you on your screen, and I'm still in some ways paying the price for them. Dr. Lancelot Pinto was the first to call out the indiscriminate use of steroids. Now he's issuing the same health warning about the much talked about monoclonal antibodies, and we will look at them also in the course of the program. Dr. R.K. Mani was the first to honestly concede that doctors are under pressure from patients. So instead of doctors guiding patients in COVID, sometimes it's been the other way around, and doctors do it to manage the situation. Dr. Mohan Joshi of Sion Hospital, one of the key public hospitals in Mumbai, is with us. And Dr. Joshi in the past has strongly defended the efficacy or the effectiveness of Remdesivir. So I want to really understand from him how he's looking at this new protocol. And finally, we're joined by Himanshi. Himanshi lost her father to COVID, but actually, more accurately, Himanshi lost her father when the oxygen ran out in that hospital. And I know for patients who literally had to dip into life savings to buy injections of Tociluzumab, Remdesivir, look for plasma donors, all of which has been junked now. All of which has been junked. So as a daughter, what she feels, we'll ask her a little bit about that as well. Dr. Pinto, I'll start with you. You called out steroids and it created a major debate, and I actually had doctors very angry with me saying that we were name-calling the only life-saving drug in this treatment. Now you've seen the protocol totally change to even drop azithromycin, doxycycline, ivermectin. None of these drugs find any mention. I saw on your Twitter feed you welcomed it. What about those of us who've had it for 16 days, 20 days, 3 weeks? And I would say that would be most of India who's had COVID.
I think it's unfortunate that our guidelines were not updated in line with what the world was recognizing was the evidence. Evidence does get updated, so it's not like India was the only country which updated its evidence. I think the unfortunate part was that it's come very late. So if you look at HCQ, it was initially touted as a wonder drug. Donald Trump placed this order, said that this is the drug that will save us from COVID. Then we went through the same cycle with a bunch of drugs. And that's typically how science works. You start off with a small study that shows promise. Usually there are a couple of people who are very vocal supporters who say that this is the drug that should make a difference. But eventually there's a large study which is conducted, and the large study tells us that, when tested adequately in a scientific manner, a particular drug does not necessarily work. And I think that's the cycle that went for a lot of drugs. Unfortunately, people who have been following evidence-based medicine have gone along with what the evidence presented as and when things were updated. The guidelines, unfortunately, did not match up to that. So if you look at drugs like Favipiravir, there's flimsy evidence to suggest that it does anything at all. But we still went ahead and approved it, despite the fact that I don't think many countries in the world even use the drug or have it in their guidelines anywhere. Doxycycline was disproved by a large study called the Principal Study, which is why it got off guidelines. Same with azithromycin. Unfortunately, we kept these on for a reasonably long time. I think this is a very welcome move. So let's welcome it, even though it's come late. It's unfortunate that some individuals received it after things were proven to be not so good. But yet, we are not anticipating this to be the end of COVID. And if we can lessen the burden for a lot of future patients, I think this should be lauded, this should be welcome, and hopefully this will be a living document that will keep getting updated with time.
What would be the harmful impact, Dr. Pinto? And can we please play the pictures of the medicines that have actually been used to treat COVID patients thus far? And people like yourselves have been saying no. What has been the impact, you think, on those of us who've had all of these?
So when you talk about antibiotics and anti-helminthic drugs such as ivermectin, doxycycline, they're potentially not, they do not have a very bad safety profile. So hopefully they would not have caused any long-term damage in individuals who've received it. Azithromycin, unfortunately, is a drug that has been associated with cardiac arrhythmias. It has been a drug associated with mortality in certain groups of individuals. So let's hope that that hasn't happened, but it's difficult to prove or disprove it. Steroids, of course, when used early, were hugely problematic, and hopefully that will get rectified with time. Drugs like therapies such as plasma were proven to be not beneficial, and we continue to be used for some time. Hopefully that will not be the case. I think the biggest problem with using drugs which are safe is that it often gives people a false sense of security, and they tend to reach the hospital later than they normally would. So individuals have this feeling that, oh, because I'm on this drug, which is like 9 tablets in the morning, 9 tablets at night, tomorrow will be better, and tomorrow will be better. And that delay is something that we've noticed at the hospital end. So when we've received patients, we've sometimes received patients much later than they probably ordinarily would have come to us, because they kept hoping that these drugs would do something.
I actually think that's a great point, because I remember even when I was being given this medication, one of the things I was told is it'll keep you out of hospital. And I think people really mistake taking these drugs and this template. Like I said, even I can prescribe what doctors were prescribing like by heart now, because I know so many people who were given this combination. Dr. Joshi, are you fully convinced about this change in protocol? Because I know we've been interviewing you pretty much the last 15 months. And the last time we had a pretty interesting debate over the use of Remdesivir. You actually said that you had seen clinically good results if given on time. You said you would use it on people you love, on your relatives, and you had. Now, when you see most of these drugs vanish from the protocol right now, how does it make you feel as a doctor at the front line? This flip-flop must be confusing for doctors as well.
A very difficult and tricky thing, but we are evolving in the treatment. The logic which we started using these drugs, mainly the HCQ or Ivermectin, was the anti-inflammatory use of this drug. Where suppose XYZ drug is used in the arthritis, XYZ drug is used in the in some other disease where the role of anti-inflammatory role was taken into consideration. But now we are coming almost to a conclusion that the cure is internal, cure is because of immunity, cure is because of humoral and cell mediated immunity. And I would tell you that it is a need of the hour that we need to study why XYZ person has not suffered from COVID and what is different in him and in a person who has suffered from COVID. Because the second aspect is that we are able to assess the efficacy of an antibiotic in vitro, because we allow the organisms to grow and we put a drop of antibiotic in a petri dish and we
Yeah.
see the inhibition of organisms. Now similar thing we are not able to achieve in a viral disease. And this third thing, which is very important, is that the virus induces certain damages through the chemicals or through the inflammatory markers. And the result which is there is the destruction of the parenchyma of the lung. Now, at this moment, when the large amount of lung portion is destroyed here in this particular viral disease, that is COVID, we the recovery depends on the repair of the lung parenchyma, and recovery does not depend on how much virus we kill by a drug later
But
on once the
can I
damage
ask you
is done.
something? But can I
So
ask you
this is
something?
what is very important. So these are
Yeah,
the few things which are there, and therefore the
I
treatment is
understand.
evolving.
Yeah,
And
I
at
understand
a
that, and
later date, the
I
trials
fully
tell
respect
us
it. Yeah, I fully
something which
respect
is
that.
different.
I fully respect that doctors have had to take decisions with a virus that even science did not understand, and there's no better evidence of that than to remind people that WHO started by telling people that it was not necessary to wear masks and to leave the masks for doctors. So, how far we've come from what we know and what we don't know. So, of
Okay,
course, we understand that.
okay.
But, Dr. Joshi, can I
Right
ask
side.
you? Dr. Joshi, can I ask you something? Why were antibiotics being given for a viral infection? This is something I try to ask my doctor also. Why were we taking doxycycline or
Uh,
azithromycin? I was given it for 16 days. I had doxycycline twice a day for 16 days. Dr. Joshi, why were we being
no,
given an antibiotic for a viral infection?
no. I agree with it that it is always not a pure viral infection. When the lung parenchyma is destroyed, there is always a secondary bacterial infection. So that is taken care by, to some extent, by the antibiotics which are given. And the antibiotics commonly given are azithromycin and doxycycline. So that is the whole thing about it, and therefore you have been given probably a prophylactic antibiotic along with the antivirals which you had received during your COVID period.
Right. Let me take this to Dr. Pinto and then I'm going to open it up. Dr. Pinto, did it make sense to you the long course of azithromycin or doxycycline? And literally, I want to tell you, I do not know a person who has tested COVID positive who has not been given these drugs. So there was some pan-India consensus on the giving of these antibiotics. If we were told secondary infections, what if some other part of your body gets infected? And you heard Dr. Joshi explain it. Does that convince you? Would you administer antibiotics?
So I would not, and I have not. But I think the rationale behind the use of azithromycin came from its immunomodulatory properties. So azithromycin, in addition to being an antibiotic, also has certain immunomodulatory properties. And there was this French researcher called Didier Raoult, if I remember right, who was a big proponent of using azithromycin in combination with hydroxychloroquine. So that's where the rationale behind using azithromycin came into play. Doxycycline, I'm not even sure where the rationale really came. But no, I do not. I do not think there is a concern of secondary bacterial infections early in COVID. The secondary bacterial infections for any viral infection tend to occur in the second or third week post the viral infection. So I don't see any scientific rationale of continuing to use antibiotics, especially in the first 10 days or so. And this was also tested. So the recovery trial tested azithromycin and found it to not be useful. The principal trial tested both doxycycline and azithromycin and found it to not be useful. So it's not just a gut feeling that it's not useful anymore. It was actually tested in trials and found to be not beneficial. So I don't think we should use it anymore for sure.
So, Dr. Vani, building up on the pressure that has been borne by patients upon doctors, would you also say that there was a peer pressure? That when you knew that everybody was administering antibiotics, ivermectin, Fabiflu. Someone explain that one to me. What is Fabiflu and why do you have to have hundreds of, well, I'm exaggerating, but literally, because you have to have so many tablets to have it. You literally, I remember when I had COVID, I was having about 30 tablets a day. And I'm not exaggerating. Between the Fabiflu, the Ivermectin, not to forget the vitamins, that zinc, D, B, C, plus Fabiflu, this was the set piece template. I think I was having more than 30 tablets a day. So what is this? What was driving doctors to adapt the template that we see on our screen right now, Dr. R.K. Mani?
You know, I must say that there's a background to it. It's not due to COVID. I think as a culture, we are used to using a lot of medicines, taking a lot of medicines. Even for common ailments which go away by themselves, even for the common flu, we were using antibiotics, for instance. Now, you see, when you got some other form of illness which was more threatening, it was natural for our culture. There's a medical culture and there's a social culture which both together conspired to use, sort of throw the kitchen sink at it. What we didn't understand or what we were threatened by, we threw everything we had in our hands. So that isn't a good policy or principle in medicine. In quality medicine, we need to weigh the risks and benefits of everything. Now, even if something is seemingly harmless, we're not going to give it because it's harmless, unless we are sure about its efficacy. Now, what had happened was, any half-baked evidence, which had just, anecdotal evidence or a very, very small studies, very poorly planned studies or studies done by the manufacturers, as though there is no conflict of interest, they were all accepted as evidence because they fed into this usual practice of throwing the kitchen sink at everything we felt threatened by. Now, 85 or 90% of these viral infections, be it influenza or COVID, they go away by themselves. All we need to do is symptomatic treatment. So I agree entirely with Lancelot. There is no absolutely rationale or in fact anything in quality medicine that we know which obliges us to write an antibiotic at the outset.
But have you been giving them, or are you now the wiser for knowing? Because I think we have to also recognize what happens in experimental therapy, right? You have to try. Sometimes you try everything you have. You throw everything you have at a problem.
No, actually, that is not the way medicine works. Medicine works with careful balancing. I have not used ivermectin for more than a year now. I have not used Fabiflu for more than a year. Nor, of course, chloroquine I hardly ever used, even though Trump was trumping for it. I never used it because I knew from the start it had nothing going. It had risks, as Lan said. There's risk to the heart. It is arrhythmogenic. And then I am a little scared of using antibiotics for two reasons. It's not because you're covering. There's nothing called prophylactic antibiotics. Sorry, that is an oxymoron. You can't shoot at an enemy before the enemy appears. It doesn't happen that way. You can wait for the enemy, but you can't shoot into the dark. You only waste your ammo.
So why have so many doctors been giving it? If all of you have agreed, I think Dr. Joshi, you don't fully agree, right? Dr. Joshi, you don't fully agree on the antibiotics. Sorry, Dr. Mani, I'll let you complete your point and then I'll go to Mohan. Just complete your point, Dr. Mani. Yeah.
Now, I want to complete the point by saying that this is another reason to introspect why we are giving what we are giving. And this question should be opened up properly, within the medical profession as well as involving the society, because there's a common interest. We must protect the environment. There's an ecosystem in the environment which we are harming as well. It's not just the individual. We are a country where we have the maximum antibiotic resistance burden. Now, you throw an anti-helminthic, antibiotic, and steroid, and all sorts of immune modifiers, what do you get? I shudder to think what we will have at the end of COVID.
I mean, that's what I think many of us who were given all of this are really shuddering to now read all the new sort of science that is coming our way. And I've often said I feel sicker post-COVID than I did during COVID. I really do. I feel weaker, more tired, more swollen up and inflamed. Strangely, though, all of these drugs were meant to be anti-inflammatory, more problems breathing, literally sicker during, in this recovery period than I did during COVID. I wanted to actually go to Dr. Joshi. We'll get him back because he rationalize the use of antibiotics. Dr. Guha, in Bihar, in your hospital, with your patients, this set piece template, this protocol that existed that the government of India actually endorsed that has now been dropped. How does that make you feel as a doctor? And is it very confusing for doctors to also continuously get new guidelines?
Yeah, it is confusing, Barkha. And at the outset, I would say that for a disease which is absolutely new, which is killing thousands, and for which we don't have any specific treatment, so anything which filled the void was acceptable at that time, at that moment of time. And that's why I think these HCQS and Ivermectin and all other drugs, azithromycin, doxycycline, filled in that void. And since, as doctor has rightly said, that we are in a country, we have a culture of taking medicines, and especially when we have the legislations, but we don't have the teeth to bite them. Every drug is available over the counter in our country. You can have steroids, you can have anti-cancer drugs, anything is available over the counter. So these drugs were started using, and I won't say that they were totally baseless, because azithromycin and doxycycline both had some element of antiviral activity in some remote trials. Azithromycin was seen in cystic fibrosis. Then doxycycline also has a trial in some mucosal inflammation, viral infection. So they had some small relevant reports previously for their antiviral activities. So probably that was one reason why they were
Did you find them
upon.
useful? Did you find them useful? Because I mean, and here we are literally like it's not my job to judge doctors who are administering these.
That's a very
This was
very
the
difficult
official.
question to answer. That's a
No,
very difficult question. When the disease started, we were using. I must admit, I also prescribed doxycycline to a few patients, and naturally at that time I didn't maintain a cohort without that antibiotic. So it's difficult to compare now in retrospect whether that drug was useful or not. But yes, as Dr. Pinto has said, probably you can assume that these drugs were not so harmful. Doxycycline, azithromycin, and ivermectin, we use them otherwise also. So probably we can assume that they were not so harmful in the long run. Yeah.
have you dropped it now, Dr. Guha, or have you
Yes.
dropped it now that the
Oh,
government has
yes.
said to drop it? When did you
No,
drop
no.
it? Like when did you
We
feel
have
like
dropped
it's not
after the,
having any impact?
right after the new trials is coming, because that's what science is all about. We do some experiments, some are proven right, some are proven wrong. Those which are proven right becomes evidence, and sometimes those we have proven wrong today may be proven right 5 years later, and we take a U-turn. And that's what is science about. So we don't
And
know,
I think,
maybe doxycycline and so will again come back after a year. You can never say. It's difficult
yeah,
to say.
that's a fair point. Dr. Joshi, sorry, Trupti's been waiting a long time, but I really want your interjection on the fact that you said that antibiotics were not all, it was not a non-scientific idea to prescribe it. There was science attached to it. Do you still feel that? Are you still prescribing it at Sion Hospital to your patients?
No, you are talking of antiviral drugs or antibiotics?
I'm talking about azithromycin and doxycycline, and also all those zinc and all of the prescribed package that has been given to COVID patients. Till the new government guidelines, did you still believe in it? Were you still prescribing it? And if so, can you share the reasons that you still believed in it?
No, we are not prescribing definitely the anti-inflammatory drugs, that is HCQ 101%. To some extent, and some physicians in my hospital do believe that they give ivermectin, but that is also lesser and lesser on the lesser side now. But we do give antibiotics to some patients, and we do give antiviral drugs to almost all patients.
When you say antiviral drugs, can you elaborate some which drugs you mean?
Yeah, Flavipiravir and
So you do
in
believe in
moderate and severe
Fabiflu. You
patients.
do believe in Fabiflu, Dr.
Yeah,
Joshi.
we
You
do
do.
give it. We do give it.
Can you explain why you give it? Can we come out? I really want to hear this because Fabiflu was my most hated medicine during COVID. I hated it. I thought it made me sick. So I really want to know about Fabiflu.
No, it is designated virostatic drug. It is a designated virostatic drug, and therefore it is postulated that you do not want virus to replicate in the body. Actually, I'm telling you that the efficacy of these drugs, take it Remdesivir, take it Fabiflu, or take it anything else which is coming as a newer antiviral drug, we are not able to assess the efficacy of that drug. What we do it in what we say antibacterial drugs, by culture of that particular drug, by culture of that particular virus or bacteria, and then put a drop of it, what we call it as inhibitory effect of the antiviral drug, inhibitory effect of the antibacterial drug in a bacterial petri dish, which we are not able to do. So therefore, whatever, when we give this particular drug and the patient recovers,
You think it
then
works?
it is we don't know.
Fair
We
enough.
don't know
It's a
whether the
lot of
patient
things
is
are
recovering by his own
hypothesis right
immunity
now.
or her
Yeah.
own immunity, or because of XYZ drugs. When XYZ drugs are given, we assume that they are
The
given and
drugs
the
have
patient
worked.
has recovered, and the
Right.
trials declare that that is the percentage outcome or something like that. So
Fair
that is the
enough.
whole thing
I
about this.
must actually compliment you on your candor, because basically you're saying that it is a little bit like shooting in the dark, and the idea
Yeah.
is to see life. If you get out of the dark into the light at the end of the tunnel, you don't know, was it the torch or was it just that you were able to feel your way out? And that's
Yes.
actually where we are. That's actually where we
Correct.
are with
Correct.
COVID. So
I am
Trupti,
honest. I am honest to tell you. I'm not talking theoretically.
I am complimenting you
Yeah.
completely on your candor. And you and Dr. Mani
Yes.
have been very honest to the pressures that you have felt in administering these drugs and saying we don't know. Trupti, now I must share that when I got COVID, Trupti kept calling me and saying, do not take anything but the crocine for the fever. And that's not what happened. I didn't listen. And here I am. Trupti, have you been confident enough to stick to that protocol with your patients? Or do your patients come with this Google knowledge of this COVID drugs package and say, आप हमें ivermectin क्यों नहीं दे रहे, आप हमें Fabiflu क्यों नहीं दे रहे, and so on? Trupti, go ahead. Dr. Gilada.
Yeah,
Trupti Gilada. Yeah.
I think that definitely is the scenario where people who do not prescribe too many drugs are a minority. And patients definitely come back asking why these medicines haven't been prescribed. In fact, when we do not prescribe medicines, we take longer time to counsel the patients that this is what these drugs do and they have no effect. And honestly speaking, I have never written a single prescription of Favipiravir or Ivermectin. I see it's a time to introspect on the healthcare delivery system. And I think there are three major things that we really need to introspect on. One is the entire practice of medicine in India is a lot of it is emotion-based medicine rather than evidence-based medicine, where we just feel the need to give something to the patient despite knowing that most viral infections will just improve by themselves. We never require to give any antibiotics for flu, and therefore we would never require to give any antibiotics for a mild COVID infection. So I think we really need to, as a medical fraternity, it will take a really long time, but I think we really need to start doing things to move away from emotion-based medicine and go into the evidence and see where the evidence is.
But what if the evidence is not there? You see, you heard Dr. Joshi saying that his physicians are still giving Fabiflu. But they don't know, did the Fabiflu work or did something else work or did the patient's own immunity work? And I think that's very candid. We don't know enough about this virus.
But when there is no evidence, we don't give the drug. I mean, it's as simple as that. For example, Favipiravir is made in Japan. Japan itself did a study and found no benefit. Japan doesn't have Favipiravir in their own guidelines. Why should we have a drug in our guidelines when there isn't enough evidence? It wasn't that these were magical drugs to begin with anyways. So that's the second problem. Whenever we bring in a drug for restricted use or emergency use authorization, when the other countries do it, after a few weeks, after a few months, they will review what the data is. And based on the updated data, they will continue that authorization or they will withdraw that authorization. When we approve a drug because it's an emergency scenario, okay, I agree that we did not know how to treat COVID, and therefore we approved or repurposed certain drugs. But when there was enough evidence available, at that point, we really need to make it public that we thought that these drugs would work, but they do not, stop prescribing it. So once an approval is given, it's not like a lifelong approval.
Like what happened with HCQ. There was a sense that HCQ worked, and then there was an admission, a very clear admission that it doesn't work, don't waste your time. But Dr. Pinto, and then I'll come to you, Himanshi. Dr. Pinto, you just heard Dr. Joshi saying that he still believes, not 100%, but there's a working hypothesis, and you can't rule out that Fabiflu doesn't work, that we don't know that it doesn't work. We may not know that it works, but we don't know that it doesn't work. And so till these guidelines came, his physicians were still believing in it.
So that's the thing about a disease like COVID, where 85% of individuals are going to get better with nothing. So the physician who prescribes favipiravir believes that 85% of his patients got better with favipiravir. The physician who prescribes azithromycin and doxycycline believes that 85% of his patients got better. So unless you go down the route of practicing evidence-based medicine and experience it yourself, that I gave nothing and my 85% of my patients got better, how will you reinforce that belief in evidence-based medicine? So if you look at the favipiravir study, it was actually a negative study. The study was done in 150 patients. The primary endpoint was negative, but there was a lot of spin around it. And that's the unfortunate thing that we need to. So I think as proponents of evidence-based medicine, the onus is on us to spread the right message before the wrong message takes over.
Now, what really concerns me are two things. One, what is the impact on people? I suspect hundreds of thousands of Indians, even those who did not test COVID, by the way, took Ivermectin. Many took, they almost thought it's a preventive. I know so many people who just took Ivermectin as a preventive. And the other question, of course, is a financial question, because when it came to, and an emotional question, plasma therapy, Remdesivir and Tociluzumab, very, poor families, sometimes low-income families were running around from pillar to post, organizing these. Himanshi, if you're there with us, I want to quickly ask you, we know, of course, your father died because of, a shortage of oxygen, and that is absolutely criminal. But did you also have to run around, were you asked to get all these medicines? Did you have to run around trying to organize plasma, Remdesivir, Tociluzumab? Were you given all of these medicines that have now been dropped by the government? And how does that make you feel as someone who lost a loved one? Himanshi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Barkha. So, yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Himanshi, we can hear you.
Okay. So, okay. Okay. So, my father's mother report got positive report came on 23rd of April, and my first report was negative, and on 23rd again my report also came positive. And before that, I consulted a doctor for me, my father, and mother as well, and he suggested the same medicines. And for my father and mother, he recommended Fabiflu, and that was the time when my struggle actually started in the industry. There, I started running around the chemist shop, and it is the time of the April, around 24th or 5th of April, no, sorry, 22nd or 3rd of April itself, because 24th my dad got admitted. And there I just remember, like, there was one chemist near to my place. I called him, asked for Fabiflu. He said, okay, he inquired a lot first, that from where are you talking, why you need it, and everything. And then he said, you come at my shop, don't mention it openly, and it is of 800 mg, cost around 2500 rupees. And doctor, I think, recommended 2400 mg once a day, or I guess twice a day in the starting. And then I called one of my uncle. He bought 2500 rupees from Bhagirathi Palace, that is around 8 tablets of 400 mg. So that was the price difference first, because that is the way I thought कि ये बहुत अभी black market हो रहा है, and chemist ने भी बहुत ज़्यादा इसके बारे में बात नहीं किया, and he gave me very elevated prices for it. And then after that, Fabiflu, मेरे parents को Ivermectin, Doxy, Dexa, everything was given. same chemist पे Dexa की medicine जो injections थे, he was not giving me. Then one of my sister is doctor, she called him and उसके बाद मेरे को वो Dexa का injection मिला for my father. क्योंकि उनका फीवर नहीं उतरा था and there were some complications at home only. And if I talk about Remdesivir,
sorry, Remdesivir, complete your point about Remdesivir. Yeah, and then I'll ask you.
yeah, and so now after that my dad got admitted. Okay, so, and the second struggle was to get a bed in Delhi, which you already know the story behind it. Then thirdly, the main issue was to get the oxygen in Delhi. Then again, I hooked up into the big lines to get the oxygen cylinders, sitting till 5 a.m. in Ballabgarh, big industry plants, but still not getting it. And after that, next was like getting the injection. Now the struggle came when doctor prescribed the injection and they said we will not give you from hospital because it is not available. So at that moment, I contacted my friends. I joined many COVID groups, and they mentioned many of the addresses in Kalkaji, which was the government shops actually that directly provide the stock to the hospitals. But वहां जाके पता चला कि रात को 12 बजे 8 टोकन ही मिलते हैं. 8 टोकन्स ऑलरेडी डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो गए हैं. उसका प्राइस 3000 से 5000 के बीच में था, लेकिन अब वो नहीं मिलेगा. तो मैं ऐसी बहुत सारी शॉप्स पे गई. लाइक आई स्टार्टेड रनिंग 9 in the morning. और जब मुझे कहीं पे भी कोई भी लीगलाइज शॉप पे कहीं पे भी कुछ नहीं मिला, आई वॉज वेरी वरिड. And my dad was in tension कि पता नहीं यार इंजेक्शन नहीं मिलेगा तो क्या होगा. And he was very scared of COVID, so he was keep on messaging me कि यार इंजेक्शन मिला कि नहीं मिला. And after that मेरे को किसी से कुछ लिंक मिला. ऑब्वियसली अगर आपको गवर्नमेंट की वेबसाइट्स पे या कहीं पे भी नहीं मिलेगा ऑथराइज उससे, तो नाउ यू विल वांट टू डू एनीथिंग फॉर इट. एंड उसके बाद मुझे एक लिंक मिला वेयर आई वाज ऑफर्ड विद द प्राइस ऑफ 85,000 पर इंजेक्शन of Remdesivir. Can you imagine? जिसका कॉस्ट 2500, 3500 या मैक्सिमम 5500 है. एंड देन इन मतलब आई थॉट कि वो एक बहुत लाइक आई वाज लकी टू हैव. तो मेरे को 40,000 में एक इंजेक्शन मिला जो कि मैंने 6 शॉट्स लिए. और आप 6 शॉट्स में भी मतलब आप
sorry, it's very painful to hear what you went through. लेकिन एक फैमिली के लिए वो 40,000 कोई छोटा रकम नहीं है, right? For a regular Indian family.
That is for one shot. That is for one shot. Total 2.5 lakh for 6 shots. And उसके बाद भी I lost my father. ठीक है. And उसके बाद अभी somebody is saying कि एक ब्रांड है, समथिंग हैपन टू माय फ्रेंड कि एक ब्रांड है जो कि अभी गवर्नमेंट ने उसको वो नकली है. ठीक है. शी आल्सो स्पेंड मनी टू गेट इट फॉर हर रिलेटिव एंड शी आल्सो बॉट इट फॉर 2.5 lakh ओनली. बट उसके अंदर शी गॉट टू नो कि जो इंजेक्शंस उसके यहाँ पे लगे हैं वो नकली है. कैन यू इमेजिन दैट? एंड जो मेरे पास है, स्टिल आई हैव 2 shots with me, but I'm not able to send it to the market.
And you feel
already अभी available है.
And you feel your struggle. I was struck by that sentence. आपने बोला मेरा struggle Fabiflu के साथ शुरू हुआ. मुझे वो दिन याद है जब Fabiflu किसी chemist की दुकान पे नहीं मिल रही थी, right? So I just want to take your struggle to Dr. Mani and Dr. Gilada.
It was all black.
It was in the black market, and now it's not on the protocol. See, what really, what disturbs me about this account, beyond everything, is that no family, frankly, would mind, spending their life saving someone they can, if that medicine worked. So for families like Himanshi's to discover Dr. Mani and Dr. Gilada that this didn't even work, and maybe it never worked, and I mean, this is just heartbreaking. Dr. Mani, I'll start with you.
Actually, we have perpetuated a myth and an unscientific notion that Remdesivir is life-saving. It never was. We always knew it was not life-saving. It is not after this protocol. We always knew that at best it can improve your speed of recovery, but it never was known to save life. Now, there isn't a single magic bullet or magical drug at all. What is life-saving is oxygen when you need it. And we didn't prepare ourselves for oxygen, but we let the patient and families run around for Remdesivir. This is pathetic. I'm telling you, it is heart-rending, heartbreaking. because this didn't need anything more than opening up transparently, factually to the public. Okay, what is important, what isn't important, and within the profession also, opening up, having a frank talk among professionals. Why are you promoting this when this is life-saving? Why are you making people spend money? See, money is a fallout, but basically the false hopes that you instill, and the psychological impact that it has on the whole society, and then deviating away from the main aspects, which is life. What is life-saving? A hospital bed, intensive care, oxygen. These are life-saving. And this is what saves life.
And also the trauma of people having to stand in line, run to chemists, for love or for money. Fabiflu could not be found. I remember when I got it, I also had to pull, I think, multiple connections to actually get.
I think this must stop. This must stop. Also with this antibody cocktail. Now, this sort of promotion is for business, not for humanity, right? This sort of promoting some new drug, any new kid on the block being promoted as a lifesaver is out of business interest, not out of humanitarian interest. So what I would like, after this, we know that we can go totally wrong, and therefore we must emphasize on what is clearly life-saving and prepare for that, and everything else is a myth.
Right. Dr. Guha, is it easier said than done though? Because that's one of the things you said, that it's easier said than done because doctors don't know either, or certainly didn't know. Maybe now they do, but didn't know at one point.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, Barkha. Plus, I would like to point out a few differences, gross differences which India has compared to other Western countries. First and foremost, the policies are made by the main body in US, which is headed by Dr. Fauci, who is a doctor. In India, doctors are nowhere there in policy making directly. It's basically the bureaucrats. Number two, the drugs, there is no checking of whether any drugs are being marketed over the counter. Every drug is available. So there is no control over that. There's no control over drug pricing. And the worst part is people who are charging 85,000 rupees and 40,000 rupees for a vial. We don't know whether they would be punished at all or not. So there is a big legal loophole. That's why they can dare to do that. So there's a lot of things, lot of openings where I think we should improve. We should retrospect, and there's scope to improve. And
Dr. Gilada, very quickly, because I need to spend the last 10 minutes talking about the monoclonal antibodies. Is it going to be another Remdesivir, as Dr. Pinto thinks it is, or is it going to be a game changer? But, when we heard Himanshi's story, Dr. Trupti Gilada, it's absolutely heartbreaking to think of this young girl first running around for Fabiflu, then for oxygen, then from Remdesivir, spending life savings. And this is an ordinary Indian family, and look what we've put people through.
I think all these medicines, the way they were portrayed on social media, that, there were these anecdotal reports of drugs being life-saving or being the magic treatment. For example, if you trace back how Ivermectin actually got into the guidelines, Ivermectin was studied in one lab in Australia, only in a lab, where at 100 times more concentration, it had some effect on the virus. Someone in Bangladesh said, this is the next magical treatment for COVID. And within a week in India, we started giving Ivermectin. So I think during times of pandemic, during times of adversities, is when transparency is all the more important. If we have a drug in the market, I think people understand it. We just say, what is the real benefit of this drug? Is it only going to reduce your hospital stay? Is it really going to save your life? And I think with that data, we really need to, the health science communication is extremely important. I think that is where we really lack, is conveying scientific information in plain, simple language to the common man. And I think as scientists, as doctors, we really need to work on it.
I mean, the best example of what you're talking about is the social media craziness to find plasma donors, which has now finally been removed as an intervention. Now, we have just about 10 minutes left. I want to ask a very blunt question. Monoclonal antibodies in hospitals that I have reported from have been welcomed by doctors as the game changer if given early enough. But again, they're very, very expensive. Is this another Remdesivir moment in the making? I don't know. I'm going to put put it to the panel. But first, this is a report from a hospital in Bangalore, where certainly the director of the hospital, like with other hospitals in Delhi and Gurugram, believes that this is the therapy that is going to save lives on monoclonal antibodies. Again, something that Donald Trump took and they say recovered from. The monoclonal antibodies treatment, the same medicine that Donald Trump was famously given, has finally been approved for use in India. In fact, Roche has shipped 100,000 doses to India, and even here in Bangalore, it is now being tried. Now, of course, we know, Dr. Mateen, that this is useful only in the beginning stages of an infection, and we're going to talk to a patient who's actually benefited from this. Talk a little bit about when you're using this and what difference it's making.
We are using it in very early, mild cases of COVID. Once they know they are COVID positive and they are not symptomatic in terms of saturation going down. So in these patients who are high risk is defined as people who are more than 65 years of age, who are very old or belong to immunocompromised patients like CKD or cancer patients or transplant patients. These are the high risk patients: elderly age, more than 65, obesity, and high-risk patients, immunocompromised patients. So when these come early, we are using this antibody cocktail of casirivimab and indevimab, which is very, very effective in these people. And this particular lady that we did it on has felt better the same day we gave it. I mean,
and we can see the lady behind us, and we're going to talk to her in just a moment. Is it effective? Is it more effective than other treatments?
It's the treatment in early COVID. Unfortunately, we don't get too many patients at that early COVID.
Because people don't come to the hospital.
Yeah, they don't come to that hospital.
So this is important for people to know. You can go to hospital if you have a mild case and get this intervention. It is quite effective, and you're also hopeful that you'll be able to release these patients quite soon and not have a long stay at the hospital.
Yes, we can actually release them the same day. However, it is expensive.
Yeah.
Yet, when you compare the cost of hospitalization and the later morbidity, that's actually cheaper that way. So,
yeah. That's a good point. And this is the lady, Amina, who has just been administered the monoclonal antibodies. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling much better after the injection.
And after how many days of illness did you come here?
After 5 days.
So it still could have even been earlier, but you're feeling better?
Yeah, I'm feeling
You can feel a
better.
significant difference?
Yes, I can.
And you're hoping to go home very soon?
Inshallah.
All right, so monoclonal antibodies is the new therapy treatment that we have for an illness where we don't actually have any established therapies. This is something that doctors are saying could be a game changer with the following caveats. It needs to be early and it needs to be a mild infection. Okay, so a lot of optimism there, but I'm reminded what Dr. Joshi, who's on the phone right now, but he very honestly said in the program just now that doctors actually don't know when a patient gets better. Is it her natural immunity? Is it some other drug? What is it? So in this case with Amina, we don't actually know, was it the monoclonal antibodies? Now, Dr. Pinto, you have warned that this could be another Tociluzumab, Remdesivir moment where families are pushed into now saying, go organize your monoclonal antibodies cocktail injection, and that it is very expensive. You heard what Dr. Taha Mateen said there. He said it is expensive, but compared to the cost of hospitalization, it's not that expensive. Is the expense your only concern, or is it something else?
I think the messaging is my biggest concern. So when you use the message that it's life-saving, people assume that people who are severely ill, people who are on the ventilator, people who are on oxygen, this is the drug that is going to save their lives. And we've seen this happen in the past. Even Remdesivir in principle is supposed to be used early in the viremic phase, but it became touted as this lifesaver, and therefore people were running helter-skelter trying to find the drug at a late stage. I have nothing against the monoclonal antibodies. I think the evidence does suggest that when used within the first 7 days of illness, it does reduce the rate of hospitalization. But I think we need to be careful about the messaging such that it does not become the drug that people in hospital are searching for. Exactly what the doctor earlier said. Once you're already on oxygen, once you're already in the hospital, this drug is not going to work. And there are studies that have shown that in that setting, it really does not work. So as long as it's used early and as long as people understand why they're using it, I think it's a valuable addition to the armamentarium. I also had a problem with the messaging because it went out saying 70% of individuals, it was life-saving in 70% of individuals. So if you see how that 70% figure comes, it was 3% of individuals who did not receive the drug got hospitalized, and about 1% who received the drug did not or got hospitalized. So the difference between the two is actually 2%. But when you do 3% versus 1% as a proportion, it becomes 70%. So there's a little bit of jugglery that happens in the messaging sometimes, which makes a drug seem a lot better than it actually is. And I think as long as there's transparency around this might be a very valuable drug.
So it's the false hope and that shouldn't be offered, the miracle drug movement, as it were. Dr. Joshi, your last thoughts, sir, on monoclonal antibodies, if you want to come in on that. Are you using them?
No, we have not yet started using it. It is not very freely available, number one. And remember that whatever one believes based on some trials, everything is time relative as far as the COVID is concerned. And whatever everybody is doing is time relative, and based on the belief at that time, they are doing everything. So that should be taken as right. That means that something like crave for the Remdesivir, or giving high doses of corticosteroids, or when there is nothing, they would like to give antibiotics or anything. The trials are always engineered in a very particular way. So, it's the individual experience, of course, that we believe in what is called as evidence-based medicine. Otherwise, we'll be called as quacks. But evidence-based medicine, to create evidence itself, is an art. And what is called a right drug, what is called as the most efficacious drug or a life-saving drug and an expensive drug, may become redundant tomorrow based on some other knowledge. So we have to take it in that spirit. And what is present, we perceive, we do it, and which may be wrong tomorrow. So we have to be
as long
with
as
that
it's being
spirit.
done with full good intentions and with transparency. I think most patients would understand that. Himanshi, I'll give you the last word. I'm totally out of time. For example, for someone like you, what do you feel today? I know what you feel about the oxygen, but if a doctor honestly told you, and I think that's what happened with you, कि oxygen नहीं है, or if a doctor told you ये दवाई है मुझे नहीं मालूम if it works, would that make you feel better even with your father literally on his deathbed than being given false hope?
मुझे सिर्फ एक चीज बताइए कि जब हम लोग का पीक टाइम था, अभी तो हमारे न्यू गाइडलाइंस आ गई हैं. आई अंडरस्टैंड कि डॉक्टर्स के पास भी इसका कोई सोल्यूशन नहीं है. जैसे जैसे सिम्टम्स आते हैं वो लोग वैसे ही मेडिकेशन प्रोवाइड करते हैं. लेकिन अगर मैं उस पूरे ग्राउंड लेवल की बात करूं, दैट वाज लाइक 25,000 to 30,000 केसेस अ डे. दैट वाज द पीक टाइम व्हेन माय पेरेंट्स गॉट कोविड. उस टाइम पे जितने बहुत सारे लोग हैं जिन्होंने स्ट्रगल किया है, आई थिंक आई वाज नॉट अ लकी वन, बट समवन जिसका story thoda highlight hua due to the shortage of oxygen and everything, but there were 30 people in that hospital that died the same day, same time, due to shortage of oxygen. Now coming back to the injections and everything, I would say उस टाइम पे हर डॉक्टर जिससे भी बात किया, सबने यही बोला कि रेमडेसिविर इज अ लाइफ सेविंग ड्रग. एवरीवन सेड दैट, एंड विद द लाइफ सेविंग ड्रग फॉर आवर पेरेंट्स, इट्स लाइक दिस इज लाइक अ गॉड. अगर डैड को लगेगा तो ही विल बी बैक. तो उनको 3 शॉट्स लग चुका था एंड रिमेनिंग मतलब 4 शॉट्स लग चुका था. 2 शॉट्स आज भी मेरे पास है, ठीक है, फॉर विच आई पेड अ ह्यूज अमाउंट. बट ओके, मैंने कैसे भी अरेंज किया, आई कुड पे फॉर इट, ठीक है. लेकिन अगेन, अगर वो इतना इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं था उस टाइम पे, थिंक अबाउट द पीपल जो कि लोअर मिडिल क्लास है या मिडिल क्लास है. अगर वो एक शॉट 85,000 का भी मिल रहा था तो गवर्नमेंट को तभी कोई पिच इन करना चाहिए था, या इस टाइप की गाइडलाइंस जब हम पीक पे होते हैं उस टाइम पे हम लोग को ये गाइडलाइंस निकालनी चाहिए. ऐसा नहीं है कि जब ये 30,000 केसेस पर डे एक दिन में तो नहीं आए ना, सबको दिख रहा था कि वो स्लोली ग्राफ अब जा रहा है. तब न्यू गाइडलाइंस क्यों नहीं आई गई? क्यों उन्होंने ये टेस्ट नहीं बनाया कि नहीं भाई हमको सिर्फ ऑक्सीजन प्लांट ज्यादा से ज्यादा लगाने हैं, ये इंजेक्शन की इतनी जरूरत नहीं है, हमें फैबीफ्लू नहीं मिलेगा तो भी चलेगा. हम लोग एज अ पेशेंट के जो भी रिलेटिव, हम लोग इतना पैनिक सिचुएशन में थे, ऐसा लग रहा था कि पता नहीं हम क्या खोज रहे हैं. मेरा ब्रदर गाड़ी लेके दूसरे डायरेक्शन में था, मैं दूसरे डायरेक्शन में थी, एंड आई वाज क्राइंग द होल वे कि भगवान कहीं से इंजेक्शन मिल जाए. आई डोंट नो, अगर उस टाइम पे कोई मुझसे 1 लाख भी मांगता, अगर मुझे कुछ बेचना पड़ता तो मैं करती, क्योंकि आई वाज like I love my dad a lot, and he was like a soul to me, ठीक है, तो वो अभी भी मेरे साथ है, that's fine, but अगर मुझसे कोई उस वक्त कुछ भी मांगता तो मैं करती, क्योंकि मुझे डॉक्टर ने बोला था कि वो लाइफ सेविंग ड्रग है। तो अगर आप किसी डॉक्टर से आप कोई मेंटली ऐसा प्रिपेयर किसी को करते हैं, तो वी बिलीव डॉक्टर्स, बिकॉज उनके लिए भी ये लड़ाई बहुत टफ है, आई अंडरस्टैंड, ठीक है, लेकिन इसमें सबसे बड़ा रोल गवर्नमेंट का आता है, जिसको मैं अभी भी गिल्टी मानती हूँ, क्योंकि अगर ऑक्सीजन नहीं थी उनको ये तो समझ आता है ना, स्टैटिस्टिक्स से आता है ना कि रेज हो रहे हैं, लास्ट टाइम भी 30,000 तक हिट हुआ था, तो अभी भी वो होगा। पिछले 1.5 साल में उन्होंने इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर क्यों नहीं बनाया, उन्होंने क्यों न्यू ऑक्सीजन प्लांट्स नहीं लगाए? अगर वो दिख रहा था, अगर ये स्टडी अभी आई है, अभी जस्ट पीक हट गया, 15 मई के बाद ऑलमोस्ट पीक चला गया, अभी बहुत कम केसेस आ रहे हैं, तो ये गाइडलाइंस 15 मई के बाद क्यों आई है? जब हम लोग पीक पे थे तब स्टडीज हो सकती थी, तब और चीजें हो सकती थी, तब नॉर्मल बंदे को कोई कहीं से भी राहत नहीं है। हमने जब सब कुछ खो दिया, हमने स्ट्रगल कर लिया, हमारी मेंटली टॉर्चर हो गए, उस पूरे, शायद मैं वो फेज अपनी लाइफ का मरते दम तक नहीं भूलूंगी जिससे मैं गो थ्रू हुई हूँ, और जो मैं अभी गो थ्रू हो रही हूँ विदाउट माई डैड, वो भी नहीं भूलूंगी, वो तो अब मेरे को लाइफ टाइम देखना ही है। बट जो भी चीजें थी एक आम आदमी, बट आई विल स्टिल से कि मैं थोड़ी सी फाइनेंशियली ठीक थी, आई एम अर्निंग फाइन, इसलिए मैंने वो सब करके अरेंज भी किया। थिंक अबाउट द फैमिलीज जिनको ये बोला जाए कि रेमडेसिविर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है और आपको उसका 50,000 30,000 देना पड़ेगा एक शॉट का, लेकिन उसके बाद पेशेंट आ जाएगा। थिंक अबाउट इट। आई नो किसी ने क्लियरली नहीं बोला, लेकिन वो मेंटल सेट वही था कि इट इज अ लाइफ सेविंग ड्रग, एंड सेम एज टू फेबिफ्लू।
जो आपने बहुत अच्छी बात बोली, आपने कहा किसी ने नहीं बोला कि नहीं मिलता तो कोई बात नहीं, वी डोंट एक्चुअली नो इफ इट वर्क्स, दैट्स द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग, टू बी ऑनेस्ट, राइट?
तो मैम हॉस्पिटल तो आप मानेंगे नहीं, हॉस्पिटल ने सिर्फ एक प्रिस्क्रिप्शन लिख के दिया पापा को, एंड उनका माइंडसेट ये था, आई स्टिल रिमेम्बर, कि नन्नू वो शॉट्स मिला कि नहीं मिला, ही वाज वो एक दिन, मैंने एक दिन में दोपहर तक अरेंज कर लिया था, नो मैटर मुझे कितना पैसा डालना पड़ा था, बिकॉज आई लव हिम, आई वांटेड टू सेव हिम एट एनी कॉस्ट। तो मैंने उनको दोपहर में उन्होंने बोला कि नन्नू इंजेक्शंस मिल गए, तो मैंने कहा यस पापा, ऑल 6 गॉड। तो उन्होंने बोला, मुझे लिखा लव यू, तो मैंने बोला लव यू टू। तो ही वाज सो पैनिक विद द इंजेक्शंस कि अगर नहीं मिला तो क्या होगा, तो अंदर कोई ना कोई माहौल तो चल रहा था ना, जो मुझे नहीं पता था कि हॉस्पिटल के अंदर क्या है, और सेम हमें भी वही बात बोली गई थी।
Let me just jump in here because I think you have really put everything into perspective. All that it needed a doctor was to tell you, कोई बात नहीं अगर नहीं मिल रहा. We actually don't even know if it works. अगर मिलता है और आसानी से मिलता है और बिना आप पे burden, we're willing to try it. That's the honesty that was needed. Any doctor wants to take the last word on this? I know it's very painful to hear, Himanshi, and everybody is quite moved. Trupti, do you want to just wrap this up for us, or Dr. Mani? Anyone who wants to?
I wanted to make one small point.
Yes.
You see, again, we are giving the same spin to the antibiotic cocktail, the antibody cocktail. It is, how are we so sure that if you hadn't given this to the patients he showed, they wouldn't have done equally well? It is an assumption that all the 85% who are in the early stage will progress to a serious disease if we didn't give the cocktail, which is a mistake, a fatal, I mean, it is a dishonest, dishonesty. Scientific dishonesty. So what we must add is, it is okay to introduce this drug if it's a part of a trial. This is what most developed countries do. It's a part of a trial. If not today, in the times to come, in a few weeks' time, you will have. See, I agree, we need research, but you need to create the platform. We never create a platform for research.
And you need to be honest with people. You can't be sending young. And all I just want to say in the end is that transparency is key. And I think what Himanshi said very well was that the government believes that the peak of the second wave is over. It's a different debate whether it is or not. That's what the government believes. Cities are being unlocked.
And we need scientific processes in place. We need scientific
we're setting these
processes
guidelines after the second wave. And I think she's right to question that, right? Of course, better late than never and all those cliches. But think of somebody who's gone through what she's gone through. Well, we'll have to leave it there. I think there's a health warning against over-medication, against the absence of truth-telling, that we appreciate that it's an experimental therapy at the best of times, but what patients really need, even in the most difficult of times, is transparent communication. That if doctors say we don't know, it will not be held against them. I think sometimes just to say we don't know is the most honest thing we can do in this pandemic. Dr. Pinto, Dr. Guha, Dr. Gilada, Dr. Mani, and Dr. Joshi, and of course to Himanshi, thank you so much. And to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, as we continue to track the pandemic. We'll be back on the ground very soon, so keep following our ground reports as we travel across India, bringing you the pandemic literally from on the road. See you tomorrow. Bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.